Welcome to the In the Sweetgrass with Misty Flowers. In the Sweetgrass is a video podcast that was created as a way to document and share our culture at a wider level. Misty Flowers is the executive director of NICWIC. She is a member of the Santee Sioux Nation of Nebraska and is a descendant of the Tlingit of Alaska and Ho-Chunk.
With special guest Lenny Hayes.
So welcome everybody. This is Misty Flowers with another episode of In the Sweetgrass with the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition. And we are super excited. Today we have Lenny Hayes. He's going to talk about in celebrating LGBTQ and Pride Month. And so, as we were talking earlier, I really want him to talk about how we can do a better job of supporting LGBTQ I plus youth that are in foster care and adoption. And I'm super excited. I've been waiting for this for a while. Lenny, I know you are super busy, and I'm so happy that you could find some time to share with us and talk about this. With it being Pride Month, I know you are super busy and have been traveling all over the country and sharing your message. You have such a strong message to share with people. And so I'm so excited for our listeners to be able to hear from you. So before we get started, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure. I always like to introduce myself in my Indian name, Tukawanahe Luta, which means Redstone Coast. My English name is Lenny Hayes. I'm from the Sisseton, Wahpeton, Oyate of the northeast corner of South Dakota. I am currently owner and operator of Tate Topa Consulting. So my background is in mental health and chemical health, specializing in marriage family therapy. I do own my own private practice, but I've actually also worked for several tribes here in Minnesota, but also worked for some urban Native organizations providing mental health services. Amongst that, I am also a consultant of several federal agencies. My work is based on Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people, but also just really addressing the issues of sex and human trafficking, missing and murdered. I also do child welfare work, and I also really focus on sexual violence and human trafficking of our Native men and boys.
Like I said, I have really enjoyed getting to know you and all of the work that you do. And just because I interviewed you for one of my classes, I know you have a story to tell. And, I don't know how much of that you are open and willing to share, but can you tell people how you got into this line of work?
Sure. So I'm very open and honest about where I come from. I grew up in a home that was very highly dysfunctional, where there was a lot of violence, which also included sexual violence. One of the things I always say is that I was a child that should have never seen things, right? And so I experienced a lot of physical, emotional, mental, sexual abuse. At the age of 10, I was actually became a ward of the court at age 10. But I remember at a very young age also being a part of the system, which we call the foster care system, right? And so I remember as a very young child going back and forth from my grandmother's to wherever foster home I was in. I was even in a children's home. I was sent to boarding school at the age of 10, experienced a lot of, my experience in the boarding school wasn't good. I always talk about that because at that age, I was raped by 3 older boys in a boarding school. I remember running away from the boarding school many times, and always remember a van pulling up and putting me back in that van and taking me back to the boarding school. My mother lost her parental rights at the age of 10, and that's why I became a ward of the court. So from the age of 10 to 17, I was a ward of the court with the tribal protection through my tribe. At 17, I was emancipated, basically told you're an adult, take care of yourself. So at 17, I actually lived in a hotel and didn't even simply know how to fill out a application for food stamps. And living in a hotel at 17. Even though I was never taken far away from my family, like my siblings, because I was right on the reservation, but I was in, several different foster homes. So I still got to see my siblings in school. But one of the things that really has impacted me about being a part of the foster care system was the fact that there was this disconnection from my own family, from my own siblings. And so even as an adult growing up, because of the experiences that I went through, there was always this disconnection, meaning that I never felt like I was a part of a family, because I didn't grow up with family, right? I grew up in a system. I grew up in foster homes. I grew up in detention centers, grew up in jails, basically because of the fact that I was a very troubled child. And when I talk about my own experiences as a child, I have had several of the social workers always remind me that it wasn't my fault, right? It was the experiences that I went through which caused me to act out as a child, right? I didn't go on my healing journey until I was 29 years old. And at the time, the trauma that I carried from my experiences up until that day had gotten way too heavy for me. I actually wanted to die. I always sort of joke about that and the fact that when I tried to commit suicide and my left lung collapsed, my right lung was halfway collapsed, and I was in a coma. And excuse my language, but the first thing I remember saying when I woke up was, oh shit, because I really did want to die. I couldn't carry the trauma. But when I talk about my own personal healing journey, it wasn't my suicide attempt that woke me up. It was the fact that there was this person who really cared about me. He wasn't a partner, he was a friend. And one of the things that he said to me was, Lenny, I'm tired of you taking me on an emotional roller coaster ride. I can't invest in our friendship anymore. That's what got me into therapy. And so the first 9 months of my therapy, I worked through my relationship with him, but also the fact that I sent him a letter and apologized to him. And I didn't expect anything from him, but it was, I apologized to him and acknowledged my own behaviors. And so with that, that's where I began to work on the trauma, as I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. And like I said earlier, I shouldn't have seen as a child, seen some of the things that I seen while growing up, which really impacted me. And because I grew up seeing domestic violence, sexual assault, all of that, I acted out as an adult, right? I didn't hurt anybody in a sexual way, but what I talk about is I acted out in many different ways by verbal abuse, verbally abusing my own partner. Because I identify as a bukta. I grew up with that word as being very derogatory. And really just, I don't know if a lot of our audience members know this, but just understanding that word internalized homophobia. That's what I had. And I really hated myself for who I was because nobody taught me as a child, because people always ask me, how did you know you were different? Or when did you come out? I don't have a coming out story. I always sort of chuckle about it. And I tell people that I came out in a rainbow dress because I don't remember when I came out. And so again, going back to what I said earlier, no one taught me about my identity. Nobody taught me what it means to be a Winkta, and just understanding that role of a two-spirit person through my own work, through my own research, through my own connection to the two-spirit community, the elders within the community, sitting with them, learning. Today, I have learned to really embrace my identity as the two-spirit. And so with the two-spirit identity, what I always remind people when we talk about two-spirit identity is that we really need to understand that not every tribe connects with the term two-spirit. It's a universal term, right? And so I'm always reminding people to go back to their elders within their community, because there was a word for us. We weren't called lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Those are words that we adapted to today. But so I'm always reminding people to go back and learn the word in your language. So for me, I always say I identify as a Winkta first, because that's the word that was given to me by my people. Second, I identify as two-spirit, because that's a fairly new word that came about in 1990. And then lastly, I identify as a gay male. That's my way of decolonizing my way of thinking and taking back the word that was given to me by my people. But also just understanding that word is a very powerful word, because it really consists of like the role that I play in community. We know that our two-spirit people played a lot of roles in community before colonization. I mean, we were considered medicine people. We took in orphan children. We did all these powerful community roles. And so I always say, probably in the last 7-8 years, I really sort of walked into and understood my role as a two-spirit. So I always say, well, I'm a mental and chemical health person. I work with people, I sit with them, I talk with them, and just learning about my own identity. It's just, embracing that identity, because that's who I am. So I'm not ashamed of who I am, but I grew up hated by my own people, hated by my own family, hated by my friends because of my identity. But again, nobody taught me what it meant to be this way, right? And just having that deep understanding of how colonization has really changed our view in how we look at these people. So with that, I always say, before colonization, we were considered sacred. We were considered spiritual beings because of the roles that we played in community. But because of colonization, we're looked upon as sexual beings, meaning that, that spiritual role, that spiritual identity that we carry just doesn't matter, right? And so we have a lot of our two-spirit and Native LGBTQ leaders across Indian country who are really, really fighting to bring back that beauty and balance of what it means to be a two-spirit or a Native LGBTQ person, right? But again, I mean, just reminding people that we had no such words for those terms in our language, right? We were forced to sort of adapt to it. And that doesn't mean a bad thing, right? Because I don't ever want to take away somebody's identity and how they identify, right? But just having people to understand like my own identity. The thing that I always speak of too is that a lot of us are forced to use pronouns, right? And I understand why pronouns was created. Pronouns was to help our transgender community, right? But people get angry at people because they don't use pronouns. I always say to people, I don't use pronouns because I believe it's a form of colonization. And the reason why I say that is, before colonization, our people looked at us equally. Yes, we played roles in our community, right? But it wasn't important for us to like ask people, which pronouns do you use, right? We just knew. And from my understanding and learning from the elders, many of our elders get really confused because they don't understand why we have to do that, right? Because we don't look at our people in that way. And so what I've learned from our elders is that we're just people, right? We're relatives. We treat everyone with respect and honor. But I understand, again, back to what I said earlier, that it's a concept that just doesn't fit us as Indian people, right? And so what I say to people is, call me Lenny, call me a human being. If you want to talk about me in a sense, it's okay to use he, him, and his or whatever. But I also need you to understand that if you see me amongst my feminine male friends, often we will call each other she or her, and that's okay. But if you call me she or her without my permission, then that's being disrespectful, right? So that's how I view pronouns. And I just want to repeat what I said earlier. I don't have an issue with people who prefer to use them, but what we should be asking brown people or people like me is, instead of asking them which pronouns do you use, what we should be asking them is, if you prefer to use pronouns, which ones, right? The other thing that I talk about too is that we as Indian people are failing our youth who identify. And what I mean by that is that we're not teaching them that beauty and balance of what it means to be a two-spirit, or what it means to be a winkta in my language. Because what we know and what history tells us is that before colonization, these children were celebrated. They had ceremonies for them. And if you think about all of our tribes across Indian country, one specific story that I like to tell, because I sat with this two-spirit individual, and what he told me was that in their tribe, one of the Apache tribes, is that they always say a mother knows when her child is different, right? And that's not meant as a bad thing. Mothers know. And he said what they would do in their tribe is that they would put a male or female object out on the ground, and whatever that child went to first, that's how they raised the child. There's history that tells us, again, these tribes had celebrations, they had ceremonies for these children, right? And so we know what happened when our children were forced to go to Carlisle boarding school, right? The first boarding school. Our children were stripped from their identity. When we talk about sexual assaults, sexual abuse, we know what the priests and nuns did to our children, right? So, and if you look into like a deeper perspective, these priests and nuns that molested our children also groomed these children, right? So we have to look at it as a whole, not just a small, simple thing, but just understanding what happened to those children. So I could talk about so much more.
I know you can, and I so appreciate it. You touched on so many issues and so many topics, and I appreciate the cultural background and the cultural history with that population, because there's so much of our history and our culture that has been stripped from us, and I feel like that's a very important piece, because we look at children that have been in foster care, adoption, boarding schools, and that cultural identity, and when identity is stripped, like what happens, and that's an important part of identity as well. And so and you talked about how colonization has changed that view of that population. And so I've always been told that, and so I've enjoyed like getting, being able to hear you talk more about it, and I've learned so much more in terms of that cultural viewpoint, because it is different, and from that colonization viewpoint. And To me, it just makes sense, that we would celebrate all people and celebrate and that all people have a role, like even, in our, in our ceremonies. And I just think like, that's such an important piece of our history that a lot of people do not know. And so I really appreciate you talking about that. And I could sit here and I could listen to like all day. And I just also wanted to mention that I asked Latoya to get back on because my internet is unstable. And so like, that's why I was going off video. And so if something happens, Latoya will kind of step in for me. But is there anything else that you want to talk about and share?
Well, one of the reasons why I do the work that I do is not just because I'm a survivor, right? When I had my suicide attempt when I was 29 years old, I actually wanted to die, because of the trauma that I went through. I couldn't carry it anymore, right? And so through my own healing, what I've come to realize is that Creator kept me here for a reason, right? And that reason and that purpose, I always say, is that the Creator sent people to help me heal. And so I'm giving back to the universe by doing the work that I do. Because I know that our people can heal from the traumas that we have experienced, right? There's a lot of us out there who are survivors of child sexual abuse. We're survivors of domestic violence. We are survivors of the foster care system. We're survivors of the boarding schools, right? As painful as it is to heal, I always tell people that it's so much better when we're on the other side, because for me personally, as individually, because I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, it's like I can live, right? One of the things as a mental health provider, when I work with our Indian people, one of the things that I focus on is not the diagnosis, because the Western way of healing is so strong and ready to diagnose us with all these issues, right? These mental health issues. What I know of is that I already know what our people suffer with, which is depression, anxiety, PTSD, grief are four of the largest mental health issues that our people are impacted by. What I focus on is the symptom. What created that, right? And the reason why I say that is because I've worked with elders as a mental health provider, and several of the elders I worked with actually said to me, Lenny, please don't diagnose me, just listen to me. And so I've had to learn how to sort of navigate through working with elders and not using that language, that mental health language, right? Like, for instance, codependency. Having to speak with an elder about codependency, but using a language that she could understand, right? And doing it in a way as a storyteller, because our people are storytellers, right? The other thing too is just helping them to understand the importance of, like, when we do therapy with individuals, to use our medicines. So what I've always have done is I've always asked people I've worked with, is it okay if we smudge? Is it okay if we smudge during a session? Is it okay if we smudge afterwards? Given these ways of helping ourselves, right? The other thing that I also did too, because COVID, kept us isolated, right, for several years, and so during COVID, and I knew that COVID would impact our people mentally. So the first thing I did was I created these support groups. There was actually I didn't call the first one a support group. I called it a talking circle. And the reason why I called it a talking circle is because our people turn away from when we say mental health or support, right? So I called it a talking circle, and that simply is what it was. And so during COVID, I knew that our people were going to suffer, especially parents, especially the adults in the home, because they were so busy taking care of everyone else, trying to keep them safe, right? That a lot of the times our people would just bundle their emotions, right? Their fears. And so with this talking circle, it was a space created where these individuals can come and release what they're carrying, right? More importantly, and this was a national talking circle, so there was people from all over the country that came to this talking circle, and today these people are still connected through friendship. One of the things that we were so excited about was that at the Indian Nations conference this past December, a lot of them were traveling to that conference, and so we all were able to meet in person. That was amazing. The other thing I also helped create too was a Two-Spirit support group. So this support group, again, was also of Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people from across the country that came together. And we did the same thing. We met at the Montana Two-Spirit gathering 2 years ago, or was it a year ago? And that was amazing, right? And so it's all about like supporting one another, helping one another. Even when there was a member of this group who got COVID, a lot of the group members like instantly jumped on it to send them gift cards to help them, take care of themselves with food, making sure that they got the medication that they needed, right? So it was all about taking care of ourselves. But the other thing that I did with both of the groups, because we weren't able to do those things, was just to be in community, right? So one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do, no matter where they were, and even in the winter we couldn't do this, but just thinking of other ideas. But one of the things that I encouraged was that we go outside, walk on Mother Earth, and I would say actually dig your toes into Mother Earth and feel her energy. And I don't know how many of the members of both groups would come back and say that for them that was healing. That was a powerful way of healing because we didn't understand what was happening to us, right? All we knew is that we were isolated. We were taken away from activities that we've always been known to do, like be in community, powwows, ceremonies. And so, so for me, it was just going back to what I said, was just like understanding my role as a Winkdun, helping to take care of the people, giving some cultural and spiritual aspects of healing, comfort. And so, I'm very proud of where I come from, right? I came from a bad place. I have had many accomplishments throughout my life. One of the things that I was so amazed with that just happened last week was I was invited to the White House for their 2023 White House Pride celebration. From my understanding, you have to be nominated and selected to go, right? And so when I was there, I really sort of got that really deep understanding of who I am. And even though there wasn't a lot of representation of our Native individuals who identify who were there was still some of us there to represent, right? But also just the fact that whoever thought somebody who came from a very dark place of abuse and to go through healing would actually be at the White House. So for me, when I think about that, in a humble way, I really did survive, right? I really did go into a space where I never thought that I would be. And so, and I just think of, our people, and, I think of all the things that I was taught by elders. And one specific elder said to me one time, she said, and this was earlier in my internship when I was becoming a mental health provider. And I remember sitting with so many women and just listening to their stories of violence and prostitution, forced prostitution, the traumas that they went through. And I would leave that organization feeling very heavy, wanting to cry because I didn't know what was causing me to want to cry, right? And so I went to an elder and she said, Lenny, she said, you need to take care of yourself. And I said, okay. She said, what you need to do is you need to smudge yourself. But she said, you also need to understand that the person you're working with is carrying 500 years of pain. You're carrying 500 years of pain. And so when you work with them, you're also carrying their pain. That's why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. So she said, when you leave here, she said, smudge yourself down, go home and do something for yourself. Go for a walk, watch a movie, cook dinner, anything that will just disconnect you from what you had just experienced that day, right? One of the biggest parts of my healing too, because I'm a really strong person when I work with Native people, is that theory of healing the child within. Because a lot of us come from broken homes, right? And so we were never able to be children. And so when I was on my healing journey, I was actually encouraged by my mental health provider who helped me. And one of the things she said to me, she said, I want you to connect with an elder. And so I connected at that time, I was living here in Minnesota. I connected with an Ojibwe elder and I went to her home. She knew what I had just been going through. And this was towards the end of my own, that heavy stuff of healing, right? And so what she said to me was, I want you to say to your little boy, thank you for taking care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of you, as she sung a ceremonial song over me. Because again, I wasn't able to be a child, right? And a lot of us have grown up in dysfunctional homes where we've heard adults say to us, don't act like that, you're not a child. When really you are a child, right? And so as an adult, I allow my child to come out and play. And I don't shame that child, right? So everywhere I go when I'm traveling, one of the things that I've also been taught by an elder was to call my spirit back. Because I remember at the beginning, I didn't really understand, but I would be walking through the airports and I would hear my name called and I would turn around, but I didn't know that you're not supposed to turn around, right? So the reason why that happens, from my understanding from the elder, is because you don't call your spirit back. So when I go home, even when I go back to my own homelands and I go home and I visit my sister, my older sister is a survivor also, and I'm so connected to her, right? I worry about her. I don't like leaving her, and she cries when I leave, even though I'm 3-4 hours away, right? But I always remind her I'm just a phone call away, right? But when I leave her home, what I do is I'll smudge her house down, and then I pray, and then I say my Indian name 4 times out loud, and then I talk to him, and I say to him, okay, it's time for us to go home now. I know you want to stay with your sister, but you can't. You got to go to work. So it's okay for us to talk to ourselves in that way, right? And so what I mean, just having that understanding that sometimes I believe our Western ways of healing keeps us stuck. And so when we have that cultural and that spiritual aspect of healing, I always say the Western way of healing has its purpose. But I'm always, when I work with people, always reminding them, if you have the opportunity, if you're not afraid, go and sit with an elder and talk with an elder, because it brings balance, right? The other thing that I always remind myself too is that I'm a survivor. When I watch a movie or if I read a book that reminds me of the violence that I experienced as a child, as a young adult, what I often will do is, and this was a teaching from another elder, actually in Phoenix, when I was doing a presentation on sexual violence against men and boys. And this elder came up to me afterwards and she hugged me and she said, I'm so proud of you. Thank you for talking about this in our community, because we don't ever talk about sexual violence against men and boys. And so she said, can I give you some advice? And I said, sure. She said, could you stop using the word trigger? And I was like, okay. She said, throughout your presentation, you kept saying my trigger. And she said, what does that sound like? And I was like, she said, say it. So I said, trigger. She said, trigger is a negative, powerful word. She said, what I want you to start saying is, I'm having a reminder. She said, remember, we as Indian people believe everything has a spirit, right? The rocks, the grass, the trees. She said, so when you're feeling sad, when you're feeling lonely, she said, think of those also as spirits. So when I watch a movie or read a book that reminds me or brings back memories of what I experienced, what I always say is, I see you, I feel you, and now you can go away knowing that that spirit's going to come back and visit again, right? And so I believe that our Western way of healing doesn't teach us that, right? Our cultural and spiritual aspects of healing teaches that, right? We have the power over what we went through, right? And that power doesn't have control of us. So I teach that to the people that I work with. And I give all these teachings away because that's what we're supposed to do as people, right? And it doesn't mean that people have to follow the way that I believe, but just giving them those ideas and helping them to expand and get a different perspective, right? So being a survivor, being a mental health provider, I still have struggles and challenges. I always say that my healing is consistent. It will never end because of what I experience, but I have the tools to help myself when I struggle. But I also remind myself that I'm a human being. I'm not someone who can just walk every day and be happy, right? I'm someone who experiences sadness. I'm a person who, if I want to cry, I cry. If it gets too heavy, I know that I have the strength to get through it, right? And just understanding that prayer is important, making sure that I pray every day, that I smudge myself down. Currently in my apartment, I can't smudge, so I found different ways. So I have a diffuser and I purchase oil from one of our native stores, and I pour that oil into that diffuser, so I'm consistently smelling that medicine, right? And so that medicine is helping me. So again, I mean, I know that I've talked about a lot, but I really do really truly understand my purpose in this world now, because a lot of us walk around and just wonder, what is my purpose? Why am I here, right? It takes time, it takes understanding, and I just want to say to the people that we all have the ability to heal, even as painful as it is. The most painful thing that I had to work through was being sexually abused by a child. One of the most difficult things that I had to do was to accept that even my own biological mother sexually abused me. And how I discovered that was that during therapy, I was telling stories of what my mother did to me as a child. And the therapist said to me, Lenny, that's a form of sexual abuse. And I said, no, it isn't. And I shut down. And for 9 months, I wouldn't talk about it. And finally, she said, Lenny, we have to start talking about this. And so it started coming out. I had nightmares like you wouldn't believe. So I had to discover ways of taking care of me, taking care of myself, because, all that trauma was coming out. And a lot of times I think that trauma, when we start to begin to work on ourselves and that trauma comes out, we get scared of it because we don't know how to just walk with it, right? And so, the other thing that I talk about is that when I speak of my violence as a child, and especially the violence with my mom, my biological mother, I don't talk about her in a bad way. I talk about my own experience so that I may help someone out there who wants to give them strength, give themselves permission to tell their story. Because I really do believe that when we tell our stories, we heal and we become stronger, right? I remember the first time when I was publicly speaking about all of this, And I would cry. I would get emotional. I would hold my breath. And I remember one time at an ICWA event, this was in the early years, but I started to get teary-eyed, and I stood there just silent. And I could feel the tears coming on. And this elder came up to me with a ball of sage. She came up to me and she put my hand out. She put that ball of sage in my hand and she closed it, and she whispered to me, "This is going to help you." And so with that, I just went and I started talking again. So ever since that elder has done that to me, when I travel the country, I always make sure that I have medicine in my pocket. And if I find myself struggling, I'll hold on to that medicine. But if I become teary-eyed, I don't shame myself, because the Creator gave us tears for a purpose, right? Those tears are to help cleanse us. And those tears are not a bad thing. And it doesn't make you a weak person, right? It's that we have to release our pain. And so again, I just really wanted to share a lot of the teachings that I have received and sharing them all with you, because they're not mine. I don't own those. An elder gave me to those and said, use them, share them, help others. So yeah, I know I talked a lot about today.
That's okay. I can totally like sit here and just listen to you talk. And because you've shared so much, and I just, I get, I resonate so much with what you say, and talk about your her healing journey and that process, and talking about tears, and I'm sitting here thinking about like my own healing journey, and being a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault and all of that, like and I just feel like you are the perfect picture of how you take that struggle, that trauma, and you turn it into a strength. And that's something that I've tried to do for myself, and those things, like, it takes us to awesome places. Like, in my journey, it had taken me to Washington, DC, and I'd received the Champions of Change award from President Obama. And I was like fresh in my healing journey, and I just was in tears
Mhm.
because I was thinking about all of how it took me there, and I couldn't I couldn't even like talk.
Mhm.
And so like I felt horrible about it, because I was like, man, like it was live streamed, and like all kinds of people watching. So yeah, I just have been resonating with a lot of things that you've been talking about. And we were talking about that earlier, about that 500 years of pain that our people have endured. And so I wanted to, in that, what you were saying about healing the child within, and I'm thinking, like, I need to do more of that, like, myself. But it's crazy, because we're almost at the end of our time together. And so I definitely want to give you a chance to, final thoughts, closing thoughts. Yeah, so
Sure.
please.
Well, one of the things that I talk about is that healing is so beautiful, even though it's painful. So I remember the pain that I experienced going through the healing, and I went through 10 years of extensive therapy to heal from all of the trauma that I experienced. But I also talk about, too, coming from a place where I was shunned, I was bullied, I was ostracized because of my identity. And just the sadness of the fact that I didn't even get the chance to graduate from high school. Because in the 80s, when HIV/AIDS came out, my cousin was actually the first case on our reservation of an individual who had AIDS. And my people shunned him. They wanted to ban him from our tribe. And because this was at 17 when I was emancipated, and because I hung around with him, people assumed that I had it, right? And so I remember going to the tribal school when I was 17 years old, and all I wanted to do was graduate from high school. And parents were calling the tribal school saying that if I wasn't removed, they were going to remove their children, right? And so I never got the opportunity to graduate from high school. And then I went to the college president when I was 20 years old. And I said to her, I want to get my GED. Are you going to kick me out? And she said, no, we're not, I know what happened to you, Lenny. So I got my GED. Today, I hold 3 master's degrees. And I say that with pride, but also reminding people that we have that ability through our own healing to accomplish whatever we want to accomplish. But we also have to be aware of our own actions and our own behaviors, and to make sure that that trauma doesn't creep up on us, right? And make us do things that we normally wouldn't do, right? But also learning to forgive ourselves when we do those things and keeping ourselves accountable. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes just like everybody else. I remind people I'm a human being. And, you know, I go through sadness. I go through times of like this overwhelming feeling of like, what's wrong with me, right? But if for me, if I'm connected to my medicine, connected to the people, connected to the elders, then it helps me through it, right? And I really just love the work that I do, because I really do believe that our people can heal from what we experienced.
Mhm. I thank you so much. You are an amazingly beautiful human being, and I
Thank you.
love and I'm not gonna cry. I love the time that I get to spend with you, because you are just an absolutely amazing human being. And thank you so much for all the work that you do and the message that you carry across Turtle Island. Because I think about, how many of our youth that are out there that are struggling, right now with those identity issues. And there's so many negative things out there in this world. And so meeting you and having you and listening to your message is truly, truly a blessing. And so I wish all of that goodness back to you.
Thank you. And just like I said too, with our youth, one of the things I always advocate about is that our youth shouldn't be killing themselves because of their identity. It's we as adults who are failing them. And so we need to teach them that beauty and balance of what it means to be two-spirit, or whatever word is in their language, right? Because we weren't shamed before colonization. This is what colonization has done to this population.
Right. Absolutely. Definitely. Well, Lenny, I thank you so much for sharing time with me today. And again, I wish you all the best for you and Brian and your families. So thank you again for sharing time with me today.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Thank you everyone for watching. If you have any questions or would like to know more about NICWIC, please visit our website at www.nickwick.org.